Tēnā koutou katoa and hello everybody. Welcome to the Lentil Intervention podcast. My name is Ben Adelberg and I'm coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Tēnei ka mihi ki te mana whenua o Aotearoa. And we acknowledge the local tribal authorities of New Zealand.
And g'day, I'm Emma Strutt and I'm currently coming to you from Darrinbal country in Queensland. Before we dive into our conversation today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community.
The Lentil Intervention is an Australasian educational and advocacy platform dedicated to raising awareness about the current climate and health crisis.
And on this podcast, we invite guests to chat about topics that will inspire you to take action to improve your own health and the health of the planet.
So please subscribe to and share this podcast and visit our website for the full show notes.
And don't forget to buy us a coffee if you'd like to support our work.
It has taken us 3 seasons and we have reached our 100th episode. In medical terms, we might say we've officially become a 6th region of the Blue Zones. Healthy centenarian here. But now, luckily for our listeners, we are not going to spend the next 30 minutes thanking our mums and boring you through our reflections and what our plans are for 2023. That's what episode 99 was for. So if you're keen, and you really should be, give our previous episode a listen. But in all seriousness, this is an important milestone as it goes to show the immense scope of talent right here in our own region, being Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific. Yet sadly also how many challenges we face within the same region.
Yeah, that's it. And our goal for next season is to continue bringing you local experts with content relevant to our area of the world, because as Ben mentioned, there's a lot to tackle. So big thank you to our listeners and past guests of the podcast for helping us get to episode 100. We really do appreciate it more than you know. But let's get on to today's show. We've got 3 amazing guests joining us, 2 returning and 1 fresh face, which is pretty exciting. First up, we've got Dr. Mike Joy, who's been gracious enough to join us every season so far, actually. So a very familiar face or voice for any long-time listener. But for those of you who are new around here, Mike is a freshwater scientist and senior research fellow at the Institute for Governance and Policy Studies at Victoria University of Wellington. And his research spans multiple environmental and ecological issues. Next, we have the dynamic duo, collectively known as the Rubbish Trip, Hannah Blumhardt, who we've been really lucky enough to talk to before, way back when in season 1. But this time around, we're also joined by her partner in crime, Liam Prince. Together they work on zero waste projects and advocacy in New Zealand, pretty much non-stop. And they provide presentations, workshops and resources to help individuals and businesses reduce their rubbish. So we've got the perfect combo here of skills to have a really good discussion around how we go about translating climate and environmental science into real world action. Mike, Hannah, Liam, thank you so much for joining us.
Kia ora.
Hi. Hello. Thank you. Nice
Now,
to be
to
here.
our listeners, I do need to warn you all, this is a first, 3 guests. So we're going to try our best to manage this, this chorus of conversation. So I hope it won't be too much of a shambles. Now, I've been fizzing. I've mentioned this in our last episode, really looking forward to this episode. And actually, funny enough, we've been planning this for or spoken about this. We set this up almost 2 months ago. And in my notes, I've actually labeled this as Dr. Mike and the Rubbish Trip. Really sounds like a band there. But now, but I want to use that as a lead-in to start off with our brand new guest, Liam, because you do play in a band. So let's start off with you, because you are new to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and how you came to be where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for inviting me on and getting to speak beside this dynamic duo as well. Always entertaining when us 3 and get together. But my background is in music. I studied, when I left high school, I went to study a Bachelor of Jazz Performance on the drums. So I played the drum kit. So I did that for about four years. I went traveling. Came back, I did a master's in musicology, got really interested in the academic side of music. I was looking at New Zealand identity in music and the kind of contexts where those conversations happen a lot. So government policy, music awards, and stuff like that. But as I was doing that masters, Hannah and I were attempting our what was meant to be, I don't know, it was a year of waste-free living that ended up being a lifetime so far, 8 years now. And it was also when we did our first ever public talk about zero waste. And so all of a sudden it was kind of like, it was the time of transition from my first career. Well, it wasn't really a career in music, but what I was doing into zero waste world, and that soon became the full-time thing. So it was just really, I'm sure Hannah described it in previous chat with you guys, but that was after our first ever talk we did in 2016. We just got so much interest in the topic of zero waste living that we couldn't keep up with the requests really to do talks and workshops, and we decided to take that around the country and the rubbish trip was born, and we traveled around doing zero waste initiatives and workshops and talks and stuff for 3 years, and the rest is history, I suppose.
And important to note there, when you say you've traveled around the country, I think we also got to say, well, you didn't hop on a plane to travel around. You still did that with minimal impact to our planet, so to speak. So you guys did this on a bike, if I recall correctly, the story.
We had to compromise a little bit because we're not for those people who live here in New Zealand know that our roads are not kind of and driving culture is not particularly cyclist friendly. So we decided what we would do is for the first year, because it was meant to be just a year-long project, the rubbish trip, we were going to buy a car, a dirty old petrol car, but the smallest one we could find, most efficient one we could find, and put our bikes on the back of it so that we could use it to get between main centres. But then once we got there, we could cycle around. We could reduce our reliance on the car when we could do that. But when the rubbish trip, the travelling part of the project extended beyond the year, we decided even having a car just didn't kind of fit with the kaupapa, with the what we were trying to communicate. So we sold the car and we started taking public transport, hitchhiking, and a couple of extended cycling trips as well. But it was really interesting to make that change. It did mean we had to the pace was a little bit different when we were traveling. It tended to take a bit longer. You had to plan in advance a bit more, but there were so many great things about it too. Just meeting all sorts of interesting characters, hitchhiking, and and we also kept track of the emission or the transport, and sort of calculated the emissions that we saved by selling the car and traveling in that way. It was quite a substantial amount. I think it ended up being
several tons.
Yeah, maybe nearly just under 2 tons over a year of CO2 that we avoided by traveling that way.
But one of the things we really liked about switching away from relying on a car, but also just cycling, was that the alternatives were all public systems. So it's like public transport, buses and trains, but also hitchhiking. And so you put yourself in a position where you're more dependent on other people, and that's always a good thing, I think, when we're thinking about the transition that we need to do from a high carbon world to a low carbon future, is recognizing that we are all interdependent, and that this idea that you can do everything yourself and be self-sufficient is quite a neoliberal concept, which, we can't actually live sustainably on our own. We require shared resources and collective approaches, and so I think that was quite a good learning for us. Also, when you're hitchhiking, you don't have any control over who's going to pick you up, and so we had lots of conversations. We were stuck in a car with climate deniers, and it's really great for practicing skills of non-violent communication. Because you don't want them to chuck you out of your car, or their car. You want to be in the car. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah. Also a good exercise in like finding common ground with people like that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, Hannah, when we first checked in with you, this was kind of at the starting point of COVID. And obviously, since then, the rubbish trip has actually kind of evolved a little bit in what you're focusing on now and spending more time with. And you're both also really heavily involved in takeaway throwaways, I believe it's what that's called. What's the mission with that campaign, and how can people kind of support what you're doing there? Because that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, so takeaway throwaways is kind of trying to take this idea of moving away from a linear throwaway way of doing things towards circular reuse, resourceful approach to doing things. And so it takes this one example of disposable takeaway packaging as the model for how that transition can happen. So yeah, we campaign for an end to single-use throwaway packaging for takeaway foods and drinks, and to replace that single-use stuff with properly designed reuse alternatives. And yeah, so we do advocacy, we have petition, we do policy recommendations, but we also work directly one-on-one with organisations and cafes or whoever wants to work with us to phase out single-use and incorporate reuse systems. So yeah, we've been working with Victoria University of Wellington to phase out disposable cups, and they've got this mug library swapping system, which is very wholesome. But yeah, that's something we do quite a lot of. Yeah, and also explaining why compostable packaging isn't the answer as well, because that's often this thing that people get stuck on is, oh, well, why set up a reuse system? You could just have compostable packaging instead. So trying to debunk, I guess, this idea that compostable packaging is going to save us.
For our listeners, for the benefit of our listeners, totally agree, but for the benefit of our listeners, elaborate a little bit more on why the composting solution is not effectively what you say. It's not going to save us. It's not the solution. Why is that?
Well, it's still single use, so you still have to extract resources from the planet to make a one-use product. So it's not actually addressing the throwaway culture and all the energy that is involved in creating a one-use product. And then those products will usually just go to landfill, where they produce methane because they're paper and cardboard or other natural materials that produce methane in the anaerobic conditions in a landfill. But also composters don't want them, Liam.
Yeah, that's yeah. So I also work part-time with an initiative called SkyCycle, which is a urban farming and local composting initiative here in central Wellington. And we recently decided not to accept compostable packaging anymore. And some of the main reasons were, well, one, it was just a hassle, like it's just a hassle to break down. It breaks down at different rates to other materials, so it kind of just makes it inefficient. But the main reason really was that, we were learning more about the additives that are in all sorts of kind of packaging, including compostable packaging, and even including certified compostable packaging, which supposedly has gone through, rigorous testing. But the issue is that there are just tens of thousands of different chemical additives that are used in packaging for different purposes, and the innovation around the new chemicals that are used is just so far advanced of any regulation, and New Zealand's actually quite behind in terms of our regulation of what chemicals can be used for in terms of packaging. That it's likely that a lot of the packaging that's out there, compostable packaging that's in the market, has some quite unsafe chemicals in there. And so, SkyCycle, we're really big priority for us is soil health and healthy people, healthy food, all that sort of thing. And we just couldn't justify adding that to the compost into the soil and potentially getting into the food chain. So yeah, we've kind of just said a big no to that.
From a health perspective as well, a lot of these additives transfer straight into the food. Like PFAS is a common one that's often talked about, that's used in actually a lot of plastic-free compostable packaging, like the fiber-based stuff, and you don't know if it's in it or not, and that goes straight into the food chain and into your body and builds up its persistent organic pollutants. So yeah, yum.
Yeah, we did have a dedicated episode on the impacts of plastic or microplastic within our bodies. At that After that episode, it's basically anything that's plastic in the house, get it out. It's something you certainly want to avoid. And I think another important point is also that most people, especially in urban living, don't have access to composting. So even if you could compost it, and even if it was a solution, especially with high density living, apartments, units, where many don't even have gardens, don't have a means to compost. So again, that's your earlier point of that will be another reason why it ends up in landfill, because at least with just plain plastic, i.e. non-compostable, again, not saying it's a solution, but it's almost a step better where you can recycle soft plastic. At least there's a means for that. And the composting feels like it's actually gone even further back. So yeah, agreed. It's certainly not, shall we call that another dose of greenwashing, basically, by a lot of big companies. So
it's endless, the greenwashing and the false solutions.
Well, let's not go down too deep down that rabbit hole just yet. Mike, a big happy birthday to Medina.
Yep, it's her birthday, her 90th birthday today. Yeah.
So to our listeners, who is Medina?
Medina is a 30-foot Kauri launch. Sorry, not a launch, a sailboat. It's a ketch. She was built in Auckland and launched on Thursday, February the 17th in 1932. So the
Thursday too.
That was pretty cool, eh? Wow. And I guess any boat launching in those days made the news. So I've got a copy of the New Zealand Herald with a photo of Medina just after she was launched, and so that's how I know the date for sure is from this newspaper article. So so it's pretty cool to be. I've been the owner for 17 years now of
so you're not over 90 years old, let's just clarify.
No. I'm pretty close to it, but no, she's older than me. Yeah. I'm not as old as I look.
Now, you have made reference to Medina last year, our end of year wrap up, where the episode was all about climate stories from a lot of our listeners and our guests. And your story for you, because you're deep in a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about, a lot of the climate activism, shall we say, let's just use that term. And you sail as a means to escape. It's your way of getting away from it all and just getting, letting your mind get into something that you absolutely love, but so it's important. It's an important part of your life.
Oh, it's just my therapy as well. And it's not just the sailing, it's being able to, the history that I've found out, but also just being able to go and work on her and mess around on a boat and, do something practical. So frustrating. And I'm sure it's the same for these guys. You spend so much time and you don't see a result for it, of all this not academic stuff, but the fighting that we do, the advocacy and stuff. It's a hell of a lot of, work, and you mostly feel like you're getting nowhere, and maybe we are, but it's very small incremental stuff that feels like you're getting nowhere even when you are. So being able to go paint something or build something or fix something is great therapy for me.
But we do have to acknowledge, though, you and your co-authors recently received the Eric Anderson Award for Best Article published in the Australasian Journal of Environmental Management during the year. So huge congratulations for that, very well deserved. But of course, we now have to ask what that paper was all about and what some of the key takeaways were.
Yeah, so that was, it's nice getting an award like that from I didn't know anything about it. And luckily, because the conference where it was handed out was in Brisbane, and one of my co-authors and ex-student, Adam Canning, is at James Cook University, and he was able to go along and get the award. So it's on the way to us. There's actually a nice framed picture and a one of those thingies, that an award thingy that's on the way. But the paper was about the putting, this, it was about footprinting, and I guess that your listeners all know about carbon footprints and that kind of thing. Well, we were working out the water footprint of making milk in Canterbury. So to make 1 litre of milk, how much water do you need to do that? And there's a bit of a range depending on where you are, but the midpoint was about 11,000 litres of water is needed to make 1 litre of milk in Canterbury. So, it's kind of, the footprinting's been done before, but they kind of, because the industry's often involved in these processes, what they did was, so there's three parts of the water footprint. There's green water, blue water, and grey water. So green water is rainwater, blue water is irrigation water, and grey water is how much water do you need to dilute the pollution that comes from the process, in this case nitrate, to acceptable levels. And so what the industry's been doing in their footprinting, and they would admit to 1,000 litres to make a litre of milk, because they were using the maximum allowable value in drinking water, which is 11.3 milligrams per litre of nitrate, whereas we know, and heaps of research, and we've talked about this before, is that the level where you start to get health issues from it, and ecosystem health and human health issues, is way lower than that, like 20 times lower than that. So that's how come it goes from 1,000 to 11,000 litres, is when you, and the manual, the Bible that everybody does these footprints by, that Arjen Hoekstra developed in the Netherlands, it says quite clearly that when you calculate these things, you have to work out what it would take to get the water to the ambient, to the local water standards, and so that's what we did, and that's how you come up with the 11,000 litres. And so it goes from, well, I would have thought that 1,000 litres of water to make a litre of milk was bad enough, but at 11,000 litres, it puts some of the reality. And
Insane, isn't it?
the thing that's frustrating as well is that only a tiny proportion of it is drunk as milk. I mean, that would be bad enough, so you want to have milk in your coffee or whatever, you have to think about, multiplying it by 11,000 for how much water is needed. So you tip your little bit of milk in, but most of it is not drunk as milk. Most of it is dried with coal. The biggest user of coal in New Zealand, to dry it and turn it into a white powder that gets sent off to somewhere, and some of it gets reconstituted as infant formula, but the majority of it ends up as cheap filler for junk food. It's just a component that would be put into chippy coatings or all sorts of highly processed food. It's just a really nice cheap protein for them to be able to use to make junk food. So then it just gets even worse, you follow it through, and it's not just making, it's not just the harm that's done in producing it, and the harm, you get into the animal welfare, the people involved, the huge amounts of indebtedness that's happened, the water issues, greenhouse gas emissions. Our biggest emitter is animal agriculture in this country. So it's just a pile of bad news, and it's just another one to stick on top of it, kind of thing.
And it's not just the cow's welfare either. I mean, we need to acknowledge that New Zealand's the biggest importer globally of palm oil products.
Yeah, palm kernel.
Palm kernel.
Yeah.
And phosphorus coming from Western Sahara. We import the coal. We
really struggle to find
wonderful rates of colorectal cancer in the Canterbury. Yeah. I mean, the list does go on. Yeah. So, look, it's. I think recognition is important for work like this, because I think twofold. One, for someone like yourself, at least every now and again, it's a bit of, someone took notice. I'll keep doing it. Because it is easy to just give up, and no one's listening. No one gives a shit. By the way, we're allowed to swear on this podcast. We're allowed to express ourselves.
Yes.
that's important, and I think that's important for people like yourself to get those recognitions, because we need you to it's keeping you engaged. You know, it's like you're an employee, and I need to keep you engaged, and I need to keep you to keep producing work. So how do I, give you a pay rise? Well, here's an award. So at least that I think that matters, and that's good, and that's great.
I think it's worth making the point that being that little group, that gave me the award is, and the people that would read that journal article, a pretty small cluster of academics. If your paper gets cited 100 times, then it's really top paper, so 100 people read it. But that ABC story, that the 60 Minutes story that we did on that same issue last year, last time I looked, 1.4 million viewers on YouTube and over 1 million on the ABC site. So it's just a whole order of magnitude difference is getting stuff out and through those kind of so the university here puts so much emphasis on publishing in a journal, peer-reviewed journal, all that kind of thing. But the reality is that the impact factor that they calculate from the number of citations is meaningless in comparison to the impact of doing something like that docker or being involved in that kind of thing. But they put no value on it. The university put very little value on those. Being part of that documentary would count for nothing with them, whereas the journal is what they rank us on. So hopefully that's that will change. But it's very slow.
It is important, though, to have that journal, that kind of scholarly research to back you up when you go out and speak.
Yes, yeah.
Publicly.
It's like a sort of, I mean, and in that case, I wrote an article for The Conversation based on that paper, and that had 55,000 reads or something like that. So, we try to do the core sciencey peer-reviewed stuff, and then get something out there in The Conversation or online somewhere that summarizes it, much more readable kind of version of it. So
yeah, you touched on something, and I'm going to digress here because this is actually important, and we touched on this, Emma, when we shout out to Professor Anthony Dissing, who got his what do we say? He got awarded his professorship. I don't know how we term this in the academia world, but in that episode, he mentioned, and this was more in the health sector, or for him specifically nutrition, but he spoke about the pressure that PhD students or members of the academic world have to publish, and I don't know if these are quotas that universities need to have to keep their respective rankings or whatever it is, that you've got to publish X amount of have X amount of publications coming out of your institution. And because of that, because of the pressure to just publish, the quality of a lot of the publications now is reducing, because research takes a lot of time to get good, solid results. And if you've got this pressure to just publish, or you're also looking for, I don't know, sort of topics that is meaningless, or so the quality, and then that becomes questionable. And when that becomes questionable, then you can start questioning anything that comes out. Are you seeing this in the same sort of more scientific, environmental field as well? That perhaps there's too much being published, that the quality is not where it should be, which then jeopardizes the good publications, the good stuff that comes out, but it's kind of diluted.
Yeah, there's a few issues here, because we have this thing called the Performance-Based Review Funding Scheme, PBRF, in New Zealand. So the money that comes into the university for academics, roughly a third comes from, this was what my quota was at Massey, a third from teaching, from full-time equivalent students that you're part of, a third from PBRF, which is based on your publications. So you had to do this big portfolio that you had to put together every 3 years to show all of your publications and put it all together, and then they would rank you as an A, B, or C, and there's supposed to be an A. There might be only one or two at a university or within an institute, but then most and then you expect it to be a B You could be a C if you were just starting out, but that's the money that comes into the university to pay your wages comes from that. And so we were expected a third from teaching, a third from research, and a third from bringing in outside work, so pay consultancy type work. And this is where it gets really tricky, because then you start working for industry, because that's where the money is. And so then you start getting expected to you write a report and you've got total freedom, but then the reality is that can you take this bit out? Can you take this bit out? I mean, Hannah knows what it's like. Then they start wanting to play around with the results. And so, it's especially bad in the kind of ag, freshwatery space and greenhouse gas stuff, because the money's pretty much coming from industry, very little from central government. We have this big, I don't know what you call it, our land and water, which is a government-funded thing that, and our land and water says it all, but the requirement for those academics is they have to have, on every paper they publish out of that, has to have an industry person as a co-author on it, And so, it's government funding, but it's really supporting, and it was already biased towards industry because they have the money to fund the research and stuff, but then the government just gave them another, extra boost on that by having them involved in all of the publications as well.
And then that's a huge pressure on scientists. I would imagine burnout rate is reasonably high.
It is. It really is. I mean, and there's, our morale's really low in New Zealand universities at the moment, and it's pressure the whole time, teaching, doing research, all of that kind of stuff. And there's lots of we're on strike at the moment. We have been on and off. All the academics in the universities in New Zealand have been striking off and on over the last few weeks, and so it's not a good feeling at all in universities, and I don't think that for students it's feeling that great either at the moment.
Yeah, and we Emma, we know this is the same case in Australia. We actually have first-hand sort of knowledge. We're possibly going to do an episode on this next year with we have some guests that we've spoken to that actually feel that and have been burnt out and have left academia, and brilliant people, and it's a shame, and the impact is also felt across PhD students, not just the leaders, at the university, the lecturers, the but PhD students as well. This is our future. Our up and coming researchers and scientists and all the good people coming through the system, and so it's a reality that, how do you work around that? How do you, we depend on good science. I mean, this is what this episode is all about, and we're going to get into this now. But we depend on good science, good information to get out there. But how do we get that? If it's getting stifled right at the start. So don't expect answers now, but it's more of a rhetorical question, I guess. Emma, shall we get into it?
We'll get into it.
Let's get into it. So we talk a lot about, I wouldn't say every episode, but for the most part, 100 episodes, because this will be one of them for sure. But it's all been about providing a platform for academics, scientists, researchers, health professionals, filmmakers, PhD students. We've had a number of wonderful students on the show, and we will have more of them. But giving another platform to put important information out there. So we have a lot of that. And I've told the story before that, we finish off an episode and I switch off and I'm on a bit of a buzz. That was a great conversation. There's hope. There's good stuff happening. And then I'm off to go do my chores, and I'm going to walk down. I live in Parnell, central Auckland. I walk into Newmarket, go into the mall to go do my groceries, and I'm just surrounded by the rest of the world that has no clue, and that for the most part don't give a shit. So I've gone from a bit of a buzz straight to, we're fucked. I don't see how we're going to change. And it's frustrating. It really is. There are so many good people like the three of you. There are so many good people who do so much good work Why are we not getting that change? And this is what we're going to talk about. How do we translate the facts, the science, the research into action? Not just, this is what we should do. How do we actually make it happen? So, open-ended question to kick off to the panel, as we're going to call it. Where do we start? Where's our starting point?
Well, I think we have to acknowledge where the sticky bits are. There's what Mike's already talked about in terms of the difficulty of the pressure that academics are under, but also recognizing that a lot of this research, you're going up against the way that the economy runs, and there are massive vested interests who are very well funded and actually don't even need to fund that much quality research. You can just put a statement out there, and then it becomes the responsibility of the other side to rebut it, which is very difficult if you have little resources. I think we need to be aware of the fact that it's difficult because the status quo really benefits some people, and they have a lot to lose from change. And so starting to identify, where are those fights going to be? Mike's up against it all the time with the dairy industry, and then the packaging industry in New Zealand is really, very embedded as well, plastics, but also just everything, the way that our economy is set up, just this drive to buy stuff, to make stuff, it's all, so I think just being really aware that it's not just about putting good information out there and then everyone will be like, no, of course, why didn't we see that before? We'll change everything. Actually, it's not just enough to have the information. You've got to find ways to advance it strategically and do a comms thing. It's like comms as well as not only doing the research, but
But this is all about short-term gain, because these big corporates know that things are going to run out. They know that. So, we're talking about if you're a shareholder and you want a secured return for the next 20, 30 years, surely you've got to be thinking down that way. We've had someone we've had people like Simon Michel, who have stated there are not enough minerals to produce everything that we're even hedging our hope on. He's presented to governments, and so they know. We all know. Why is it so much about the short-term gain right now? 2022, let me make as much profit as I can right now. I don't care about 2023 yet. 2022, why? We are aware. I don't know. I'm going to challenge that. We are aware. We do know.
Yeah, we do, but I don't know that the public do, the general public. I just saw some numbers. I just posted about it, but the kind of reduction that we need to have in consumption to have a hope of, so we've got 8 years to 2030, and it's somewhere around between 7 and 9% reduction in consumption, which means 7 or 9% reduction in GDP for the next, just to get to that half emission stage at 2030, which probably isn't going to be enough. But there's just no business, no government is going to say, right, we need a huge recession. It's so scary. And so, and I mean, I think of, say, Air New Zealand. I'm sure that there are plenty of people in the hierarchy of Air New Zealand who know full well there's no future for long distance, aircraft, travel. But they're never going to say it because the share price would drop and the whole thing would come crashing down. So right up until the night before it crashes, they're still going to be saying it's all good. Let's go on a trip somewhere. They're going to keep pushing it because they're out of a job instantly if they start talking about the truth. So there's a real, this is just kind of coming back to the academic university thing. They're not just here to teach people. There is a huge component, and it's recognised in New Zealand anyway. I'm pretty sure there's something similar in Aussie, that it's written into the Education Act that we are to be the critic and conscience of society, and that's so important, that role, because there is so much money in greenwashing and all that kind of stuff. It really relies on having strong voices within universities, but it's something that's not championed or rewarded, and it's being eroded away at this institute that I'm in is on its last legs because the funding's been taken away from us, and the kind of model that they have in mind is that the Institute for Governance and Policy Studies would work with government, say running short courses and that kind of thing for them, which would be an earner for the university. Whereas we see our role as being the critic of government and policy, and we should be the independent ones that point out that, no, this policy of yours is just not going to bring about the results that you think it is. And, so that's the most important part of our jobs, of academics' jobs, and yet it's not valued. A few, my previous Vice-Chancellor at Massey University, ex-Labour MP here, Steve Mahari, I got him here a few months ago to give a talk about that whole, the future of universities and what's going on. And he told me that any of his academic friends or contacts that he comes to, when he meets them, one of his first questions to them is, have you been complained about lately? And if they say, well, no, well, he says, well, you're not doing your job then, And so if an academic is doing his job, he or she should be getting complained about, because you should be upsetting somebody. Otherwise, you're not taking on that crucial critic and conscience role. And yet the university this one especially is so scared of complaint. I've had it. I guess Massey was used to being me, taking complaints about me, but this one is kind of freaked out about the complaints, and then they kind of have this attitude that the whole world is a potential client, and the client's always right, not the staff member. We trust them. They are,
It's because the world's centered around Google reviews, Uber reviews.
Exactly.
It's 5 out of 5 stars. I can't have 3 out of 5, and it's that's the world. You can have a shit driver in Uber, but you're still going to give him 5 out of 5 because you want your 5 out of 5. And that's part of the problem with academics as well, because you want that funding, and to get the funding or students to come, you want the best ranking, right? So we're in a very PC world, and scared to upset anyone, and therefore scared to challenge.
So if we can't rely on the messaging, though, that's in the mainstream media and put forward by Western governments, how do we actually encourage consumer behaviour change within a system that's not really set up to make those choices easy or the most convenient?
Yeah, well, certainly not by moral suasion. I think is kind of, it's a big one in the waste world is behaviour change. We've got to get behaviour, but a lot of people say, a lot of consultants and stuff, behaviour change is the thing that's going to get the most change from things. And when they talk about behaviour change in that way, they're talking about telling people what to do, like you should recycle, you should buy this, buy that. And it's just, that's kind of been the approach for the last few decades and just hasn't worked at all. And then really it's just a playbook from the industry, because it's a way of putting the responsibility on consumers and taking it away from industry and the players who are creating pollution and waste in the first place. So certainly not that approach. I think there's a growing recognition that actually, we do need to create the systems to incentivize people to and make it easy for people to make the choices that we need to make. And that's as we know, the realities of what we need to do to avoid ecological collapse is pretty vast. So we're going to have to get started on changing the settings pretty dramatically. But I don't know. There's very, very baby steps. You can find baby steps in those directions, but the baby steps are not enough, really.
I think that's one of the things that too, like why we maybe go out and we don't see the change being performed around us, is partly because we have massive equity issues as well in our society, which is we treat everything as disposable, not just the planet but also people, and most people just don't have the bandwidth to or often even the resources to be able to live differently. Like the system is set up to live in a certain way, and you have to put up a lot of effort, both in terms of time and often in terms of resources in order to change. Like, it's not necessarily going to cost you time and resources forever, but that transition is big. And, you know, you just can't expect people to be able to do that in the current system. Like, people behave because of the way the system's set up. So it goes back to what Liam's done. Like, what Liam said, sorry. If we want behavior change, we need to be thinking about, you know, like, if you don't want people to buy stuff wrapped in plastic, we should not be allowing companies to wrap it in plastic. Like, it's so silly to be like, we're going to change the world by telling people to inconvenience themselves to the extreme.
And that's kind of, you know, there's so many overlaps with the stuff that I'm talking about and the waste, but with the, you know, ag and impacts on fresh water, where it's doing the right thing is, you know, for a farmer would be, they're going to lose a lot of money doing the right thing because we're subsidizing doing the wrong thing by letting, you know, they're not paying the cost. The same with all of the plastic packaging. It's the cheap option, and it's cheap because the true costs are being borne by everyone else. And so it sort of always seems to come back to that. If you put the true cost on it, you know, or anywhere near the true cost of the harm that's being done. So, you know, the 11,000 litres of water for the litre of milk. I mean, if that cost was put on that, you would just not be doing it. And doing it right can't compete with subsidising doing it wrong. So it's always that putting it on the individual, but the individual doesn't have the option, you know, the individual farmer, because they're locked in a system that suits the bad stuff. And, you know, so somehow it has to be a combination, yeah.
And on that, I do have to quiz you then on a recent article that you published, you and your co-authors, called Levelling the Grazing Paddock. And in that paper, you're putting forward the idea of, rather than taxing polluting farmers more, pay them effectively to stop polluting and de-intensify their farming.
Yeah.
So from the outside looking in, for anyone that's, you know, a non-polluter, this might not initially sit very well. But the paper really justifies.
Yeah, if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have, you know, jumped up and down about it. But I realised that it's a bit like people, you know, who live on the coast and they're going to have to shift because the sea level's rising. You know, some of them knew full well when they bought that land that sea level's rising, and they just were going to go, to hell with it. You know, it's a cheap house. But there'll be a whole bunch of genuine people who, you know, it's been in the family for years or something, and they have no, you know, that you kind of got to help them out of it because they'll be locked. I mean, I guess, you know, we were saying that, but we're kind of saying it just to point out, you know, the costs that have been, you know, that we have set a precedent in New Zealand where we do pay farmers not to do that, you know, so it has been done, but to kind of put out there just how much we subsidise the bad stuff by billions and billions of dollars of effective subsidy, you know, and they'll all say, oh, we're not subsidised, you know, we're the only farmers in the world that are not subsidised, but actually the reality is it's not a dollar that's paid over to them. It's letting them do that harm and put that harm on future generations and not be charged for it. You know? So,
but the thing with your article was it's not an ongoing paying, it's a one-off payment, full and final.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, if you pay that money, then it's over. Do something else. Yeah. Whereas at the moment, it's every year that amount of money is being stuck on future generations, basically. Yeah. It was just a bit of news just came out today. There's it's been in the news because of there's a little rural supply, 650 people that have been on tank water, you know, bottled water, because their nitrate levels are so high, they're well over the maximum allowable value. And the regional council, ECAN, have made this statement. I wish I had it here to read out, but basically they're saying to the councils or to the water suppliers, it's not our fault. We're not going to pay for it. It's your responsibility. You're the water supplier. Even though the ECAN, Environment Canterbury, allowed the intensification and the water take to happen that caused all this water to be polluted over the last 30 years, they are holding their hands up and saying, no, it's not our responsibility. I'm so angry about it that they can do all that harm and they believe that it's not their responsibility. I mean, we are going to try some legal action to put that back on them. But at the moment, that's their claim, is that, no, it's not our fault. You have to sort it out. And, this is huge ongoing costs for people to actually, have safe water to drink.
So let's sort of digress a little bit. I get it. I need to bring about change. I need to be a bit more responsible. I'm still going to jump on a plane, but I have the option, and I will pay to offset the carbon emissions from my flying. Or I will continue to, this is a new thing now, I will continue to use plastic, but I will offset the soft plastic. Can we talk about the net zero scam? This whole notion that we can offset fossil fuels. We can offset our bad habits. I can get out of this because I'm going to pay some money because I can. And that's me done. That's my change. I am being responsible. It's a massive scam. There's a lot of things we can talk about here. The difference between net zero and actual zero. Targets that we need to achieve, and this whole I'll keep it polite, but scam with offsetting, and there was a big unraveling in Australia recently about all the scams happening in terms of the supposed bush and forest that we were paying to not cut down, or false accounting, all that kind of stuff. So why is this so prevalent when there are so many exposures on it?
Well,
is it back to the same story? Not enough people getting it.
But there's scams within scams, so the whole idea that you can mitigate fossil carbon with trees is flawed right from the start. But then within that, there's scams where people, say they're not going to chop down a forest, and so therefore, but they were never going to chop it down in the first place, and all that kind of stuff, and the fake ones and all that kind of thing. But I've probably talked about it before, but I think it's pretty simple to get across that if we were to replant every tree on the planet, then we would mitigate the trees that we've chopped down, where we've cleared it for agriculture and all that kind of thing. We could plant the whole planet and we wouldn't mitigate 1 gram of fossil carbon, because the carbon cycle that was in is at least 65 million years ago. And we're talking about the current cycle. Or another way of looking at it is if we planted the whole planet again and put all the wetlands back and put everything back, then that would be about 7 years of our fossil greenhouse gas emissions. So for 7 years, we would break even, and then bang, we're back to zero again, and we've got nowhere to offset because we've planted every tree on the planet. So it's an incredible self-delusion, and I'm more and more aware of just how good we humans are at deluding ourselves. And so, I'm a self-deluder myself, and so I know full well about self-delusion.
But I feel like delusion is actually like really an important part of this whole thing. Like we talked about earlier that people do know about actually what's going on. There are people in New Zealand who know there is no future in long distance flying or whatever, but people are just there's some human nature thing that we are good at deluding ourselves, or just ignoring evidence when it just is inconvenient to whatever we're up to in our lives. And I just think that's one of the biggest problems we face is we have a culture, and a political culture and economic culture, that just disincentivizes actually being really honest, and being willing to consider people you might positions of people you might disagree with, and really honestly consider new evidence when it arrives. And we just don't have that. I don't think people are just too comfortable with how things are, and it's just too much effort to even begin the questioning, I think.
Like everything becomes subsumed into the delusion, and it takes like a life of its own, like the offsetting thing, but also this idea that like we can just get all of our energy needs from bio sources, and that somehow won't be the same thing as emissions. Like that's something that you deal with all the time, this whole thing of, oh, we'll just get the wood waste and we'll burn it and it'll be, well, then we won't have to use the coal. And it's like, well, but you're still burning things. And it's like that when you were saying before, there's two different, you've got this, you can't offset or change the fact that the carbon, the fossil stuff has been burned, and you can't really make up for that by just burning something else. You've still got to reduce all of this.
Well, in New Zealand's still bringing in these 5 years' time, these hydrogen-fueled planes now.
Yeah, right.
That'll,
Yeah.
I knew this would be a great joke.
Yeah, hilarious.
Another really interesting, example of a similar kind of offsetting thing is the whole waste to energy industry, which I've had a shirt, promoting or railing against, but for so often the industry has promoted waste to energy as being renewable energy technology, and it's kind of based on this premise that waste is something that is just natural and just is always there, and that we can just waste is going to happen anyway, so why not let's do something with it, rather than actually saying waste is this really ridiculous human creation that actually no other living species on the planet produces, and ignores the fact that most of the stuff that we're burning is made from fossil fuels, plastics and stuff like that, and even the stuff that isn't biomass and whatnot, exactly the same issues we've just been talking about, and yet the industry is just so good at selling it as this wonderful idea, no more waste, no more landfills, and you get energy out of it. And people buy it. People is like, yeah, that sounds great. Well, why not? Let's do it.
Without getting the point that the fact that the waste keeps renewing itself is the problem.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's okay, because I'm going to buy my electric Ford 150 truck
Yeah.
so I can power my house with it. No waste there, right?
Yeah. I know. Well, that's the thing with renewable energy, is that the sunlight is renewable, but the things that you capture it with to turn it into something we can use it for is rebuildable, and it has a massive material and fossil fuel footprint. And I'm so sick of every day on LinkedIn or there's another renewable energy's never been so cheap. Renewable energy's cheap. Yeah, it's cheap because it's made out of cheap fossil fuels. Try making renewables out of renewables, and it just can't be done for a start. But
it's the return of energy, the whole ratio that we've covered in one of our earlier episodes as well.
But you have to, it's got a life, and you're going to have to rebuild it again. You're going to have to rebuild it, and the amount that we'd have to build to try and match the system, the energy that we use at the moment is just beyond people's.
But don't forget, we can't build everything.
No, and we can't.
That's first and foremost. Even if we could.
Yeah.
So that's the incredible delusion that we've been talking about. I call it now a magic show. We're sitting there and it's just it's a great magic show. Poof, there it all is. It's not real.
But then maybe I keep kind of edging around this, is that our storytelling has to somehow get across the message that without all this stuff, it's not the end of the world,
Yeah.
I mean, because I'm an old bugger, and I can remember when per capita energy use when I was young was half of what it is now. The average per capita energy use, and yet life was fine. We didn't have, and my second job was in a bottle recycling plant, because all bottles were reused then. I mean, bottle washing plant. Milk was delivered in bottles that got reused. Just everything I think about, how we lived then is like a green utopia now, and yet it was just the way we had one car per household, and it got used on the weekend maybe, and it was all that.
And that's important. We're not saying we need to go live like cavemen.
No,
we don't need to live. We can still have a good quality of life.
Well, look at these two. They have a really good quality life without all that stuff. I can't claim that. They live it, not me. But But I mean,
Yeah.
so that's part of the message, that it isn't the end of the world not having all this shit. It actually is better. And, you know, we know that. Like when I go sailing, we have nothing, and yet it's amazing. People go tramping, they've got nothing, you know, but it's amazing.
But it's also this whole notion of value or quality. And, you know, I have traveled a fair bit in my past life, you know, and you go to places like Europe and you can see that there are still dwellings that are hundreds and hundreds of years old and still livable and still, shit, I'd live in it. Yet here we build something 20 years later, it's going to be ripped down because it's a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And it's leaking and it's rotting and it's falling up. Why can't we build to start with? Like, okay, building is an issue, but if we build it right the first time, then surely that life cycle and that, you know, is better. It's a better return on those resources.
Everything has to be cheap, doesn't it? It's like this big, the goal for everything is that it's cheap, and it's, you know, we know how fake cheapness is. It's only cheap because we're not paying the costs, and so
So you touched on it a little bit, but let's go there now. So, okay, we've had a big whinge. We all realize that, you know, no one's bloody listening, no one's bloody changing, no one's doing anything about it. So what should we be doing? All five of us here, and there's a lot of more of us, we're all passionate. We're all trying to live change, carless, you know, going plant-based because, you know, less meat-heavy diets and all sorts. We're all doing our bits. But what should we be doing in terms of the whole advocacy side of things, in terms of activism? What should we be doing different?
We had a really interesting workshop with the Zero Waste Network a few weeks ago around advocacy and what makes effective advocacy. And one of the models that we talked about was there are actually 4 quite different types of advocacy. There's like the rebel, which is direct action, you know, being out there, confrontational. There's the reformer, which is trying to go to the top, to the power. There's appealing to the common person, trying to get a broad kind of movement for things. And then there's the connector or something like that, actually building coalitions that help to tip things over the line. And often, you know, the main point, I think, of the workshop was that often people fall into one or maybe 2 of those categories, and they don't get the other ones, or they see the other ones as not, you know, because they're kind of in the, say, the people who are the rebel frame of mind, like, there's no hope in the system anymore. We've just got to disrupt everything and change everything. They don't see any value in the kind of the reformer or, you know, different types of advocacy. But the conversation was actually, how do we see them as being complementary? How does taking one of those actions open up the space for another one, and then, you know, and the chain kind of goes around. So I think, trying to see that we need multiple different approaches, and they need to work together rather than, you know, these kinds of arguments about which is the most effective way.
Yeah, and leaning into the things that most, you know, suit you and your style. Like, you don't have to actually do everything. It's being most effective at what you feel comfortable doing, but recognizing that we actually need to work alongside each other, and that, you know, the time for individual focused, whether it's, you know, status or individual action, on its own is not enough. Like, we have to work with others. So I think that's a big goal, is continuing to build this movement. And I do feel like, even though it's very slow, like, I do feel like things are starting to, I feel like more people are seeming to get it, even within like our own circles. Like, people are starting to see the bigger picture beyond whatever silo you're in, whether you're in fresh water or waste or, you know, energy, like starting to see that everything's connected. I think that's really important. I do also think that there's still a really, I can only talk from my own experience, but I do feel like there is something in that whole thing about living the change you kind of want to see, as corny as that is. But it's sort of one of the best ways of immersing yourself in actually precisely what does need to change in order to make it possible. Because as soon as you start to try to make change, you start to see where the blockages are, where the barriers are. but you also start to see that it's not that hard. Like in some ways, like the change, you know, you can have quite a good quality of life, as Mike was saying, and I think that's really important. It's also really important to model, because if you can't do it, then I think lots of other people will be less likely to listen to the message that you're trying to deliver, or think that you're being unrealistic. And then the final reason why I think it's really important to try and activate those changes in your own life is because it's really exhausting trying to getting other people to change all the time, whether that's policy or, you know, your mate. And it requires an extraordinary amount of effort for what often feels like a very small level of impact. Whereas when you make change in your own life, you have complete control over the situation, more or less, and you can put much less effort actually for a bigger result. And I think that's a really important part of well-being. That's really important for sustaining advocacy, because we can't burn out, because then that's no use.
I have a question around framing though, because I mean, obviously it's no secret that these topics are really heavy subjects to deal with, and it can take a toll on people mentally. And if you're bombarded with like negative statements again and again and again about our situation and the science, even though they're likely true, it can ultimately cause people to disconnect and kind of tap out, because what's the point, right? But then on the flip side, we don't have the convenience or the time anymore to be sugarcoating things and potentially lull people into a false sense of security. So given you're all pros at communication in this space, I'm just really interested in your opinions on like how we actually frame the narrative. Should it be a mixture of, you know, negativity or realism basically, and a bit of positive peppered in, or what's the balance that works in your opinion?
I think the negative information is important to a point to understand the urgency, but beyond a certain point, you don't need to know much more about how bad things are in order to know what needs to happen and then to start doing it. So Joanna Macy, who's a Zen Buddhist monk, I think, has written this great book called Active Hope, and she talks about the 3 different narratives of our time in relation to the ecological crisis. One is BAU, which is everything's fine, technology will fix it all. And then there's the great unraveling, and that narrative is all about just how bad everything is in absolute minute detail and trying to get through to everyone like how terrible it is. And then there's the great turning, which is we understand BAU is incorrect, we understand the great unraveling situation, but now we start to do what we can to make change, and we're not trying to make change under the delusion that we will save the world or ourselves, but more because that is the way that you kind of don't lose the plot. You know, so turning that kind of into action, practical action, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was just going to say I got hold of Greta Thunberg's book the other day. Have you got one? Yeah, it's pretty.
It's on order.
It's
emitting some carbon.
It's a real bloody tome of thing. But you know, and the bits that I've read already, there's all the really hard-hitting stuff in that book. And her idea was to have, okay, there's the Bible. That's the facts in there. You know, let's settle these things, and there it is, and go and have a read of it if you're stuck on anything, because it's all in there. But she talks about hope as a verb, as you create hope. And that's the important thing, that you don't just go, I'm hoping that it's all going to come right tomorrow. You make the hope, and so that's the really strong message, I think. Yeah.
That aligns with going to say active hope.
Active hope, yeah.
That's hugely powerful, yeah. So from a personal point of view, what should we, or can we always like to finish on a positive. We always like to finish on something tangible, because there's big things, not everyone's about writing, letters, advocating. Not everyone's about holding a placard and tying themselves to an oil rig or something. For most of our listeners, where can you start? What's the, Hannah, you mentioned, a couple of years ago when you were back on the show that one of the biggest impacts we can make is composting. Is that still one of the biggest changes we can make?
Yeah, we're going to be really unfair right now and try and get a simple answer out of you guys for an incredibly wicked problem.
Yeah, something simple.
I mean, composting is a good individual action to take, for sure, in terms of impact, and also connecting you to the earth, and also engaging you in a practice that isn't about you but about building soil. I think that's something that's really grown for me, and probably also Liam, in the past year, is actually building soil, and it's something that you're doing for the earth, not for yourself directly. I think that's quite a good practice to engage in. I also think that from an advocacy perspective, which is also personal action, I think is trying to use the skills you have to further someone else's agenda or thing that matters to them in this space. So, because a lot of us have a lot of skills, but we might constantly be using them to further the things that we care most about. Like for us, it might be zero waste, but there is actually a lot that needs doing, and perhaps we can bring a really important skill set to someone else's equally important thing that then builds coalitions and connections. So that's kind of another personal action I kind of want to be focusing on for the next year.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think there's any one way of doing things, and I think do what you're good at is the I there's lots of things that I can't, that I'm hopeless at, that I won't even try doing, but I try not to personalize things and tell people how to live. I just say, well, this is how it is. You figure out for yourself if what you're doing is right or wrong, because we're just trying to put out the kind of outcomes of the current way of life, and so make the choice yourself, kind of thing. But yeah, it's not just personal. It's also about talking about, like getting into the uncomfortable conversations with people all the time. It's hard work, but even if it starts at home, it's because that's what, and I just feel that we don't talk about it enough. It's your podcast and a few others we listen to, but then 99% of the other shit is just ignoring it. And so, and I know you can't be doing this all of the time, but we need to be talking about it. We're too good at just, like we've been harmed. We've got post-traumatic stress disorder, and so we don't want to speak about it or think about it, but we really, really need to, and that's how we'll get ahead.
Yeah.
So we need to hitchhike more.
Yeah. Interact with your neighbours and other people more.
I think that's really critical. Like connecting with your local community. I feel like the kind of downshift and all those things we're going to need to do going into the future. Our society's got to become much more local. So we're going to need to get to know the people around us and what people are up to and what the opportunities are locally. And when we traveled around Aotearoa with the rubbish trip and went to different communities, we got to see like lots of amazing things we just would never have encountered if we didn't go for the purpose of meeting people and learning, just discovering all these amazing initiatives. And there is so much going on out there that people would often say to us after a presentation, oh, I had no idea there was all this stuff happening right in my community. So it's like let's just connect in that way, and there's so much positive that can come out of that. And it's like taking the first steps to maybe build the community who are going to make the transition to a new world, to start building that new world that we need to build if we're going to let this old one go.
Emma, what about you? I'm going to put you on the spot for a change. What's your thoughts? I mean, Emma's got her challenge. I mean, where you live, Emma, is the heart of challenges, in terms of... It is,
yes. So for anyone that's not aware, I've moved to central Queensland. So I'm currently in the beef capital of Australia, and it's an interesting space. And I've been, in and out rurally from the main city, so I've seen like firsthand the amount of tree clearing that goes on, and you just don't get to see that when you're living in the city. So it is an eye-opening experience. Look, my main goals for next year is just to integrate into the community more. As Liam said, getting connected, having those networks strengthened, because it's also a really important aspect of staying positive as well, because I tend to kind of default to the negative. Like, I'm just bombarded with all this science that I'm studying at the moment. I'm like, oh my God, this is horrible. But the more you integrate with the community and you do see all the positive changes that are happening, that kind of keeps you on the path moving forward. So that's my main goal. New area living in, need to integrate a bit more.
Further to Mike's point, I'm a big believer in you have the ability to inspire others by your actions. And I talk about it in other facets as well, but just what you do inspires people. See what you do, and that inspires them. It initiates conversation. The other aspect is, and I'm very fortunate that for the last couple of years I've been involved, or I've been a mentor at Auckland University. They have a fantastic club called the Sustainable Future Collective, and a bunch of students, doesn't matter what you're studying, it's this collective group about a whole bunch of sustainable concepts that they try and do. From they've got beehives, they've started this brilliant composting initiative in the middle of the city, they do beach cleanups, they do all sorts of stuff, and part of that they've got the Young Sustainable Leaders or Leadership Program, and that's where I mentor, and this year I've been mentoring two wonderful students, and that to me has been probably one of the most positive things I've been involved in. Our youth, full of energy, so green, so sort of oblivious to a lot of the realities, but that's the beauty. They come in with this passion, this energy. They want to change. They don't know where to start. That's my role as a mentor, to sort of guide them a little bit, and work with them on some projects or community-based projects that they'd have to do as part of the program. And the stuff that comes out from them is phenomenal. So we do have hope, because there's hope being actioned, and that's our young leaders, and they're coming through. And these wonderful students, some of them will end up in important places to drive change. Even a lot of the school visits I've done this year, do my talks, I try and dumb down things because they're young, they don't know, they get it. I don't need to dumb down things. They stick their little hands up, and then the things they're asking me back, it's like, okay, actually you do get it. Okay, you do understand the whole issue. Yeah, and I think that again is positive. And there are, unfortunately, the academic world extends to the schools. A lot of teachers, principals, they're also burning out, and it's a shame because they are doing so many amazing things there with minimal funding, with very little. They rely on the goodwill of local businesses and so on, and they do get that in some places. But, there's a lot of good work being happening out there, but there's a lot of challenges that come with it. So it's not sustaining. It happens, then someone leaves, and then those things fall over, and then you have to start again. So there's a lot of opportunities. And I think to our listeners, there's a lot of ways of getting involved. So if you're looking for things to get involved in, it's not just about throwing money someone's way, even though we do openly accept some donations to keep us going, but it's also getting hands-on involved and actually giving your time is a way of donating, and that's a way of you can inspire others as well, especially for our listeners. We're all adults predominantly, so getting involved with the youth is you can provide some leadership, some guidance, and that gives you hope in return, which brings more positivity. So we talk a lot about the collective approach, and every little bit of change or action that we all take collectively actually amounts to quite a lot. And this whole community aspect that Liam kicked off with right at the beginning of this episode is hugely important. I think what's being spoken of is now conversations around the 15-minute city concept. So even if you live in a big urban area, that things are within easy reach, but you need community approach to that, the sharing concept that even Hannah spoke about. So, right, stop rambling on that. But I think there's a lot of positivity, even though I also find myself down in the sort of negative pit a lot. I got to stop reading books, stop reading a lot of things. But yeah, that's I think there's opportunities to lead change. So. I think let's wrap it up there. So, look, this has been a wonderful opportunity. Mike, we seem to have you on a retainer, so every year you come on the show. It's expected now.
We need a regular Mike's Musings, I think.
Yeah, I think we do. That'll be one of the things we're going to do next year. Hannah, let's not make it every 2 years, and Liam, not every 3. So let's hope to do this again soon. We do love having repeat guests because we can go a little bit deep in some areas. And again, like we said at the beginning, it's a platform for people to share not just science and information, but also, and this is a focus for us for next year's success stories. And that's what we want to do more of, is show that it can be done. And that's one way of accelerating changes. Join the bandwagon. Join the cool kids doing cool stuff. Yeah. So on that note, Mike, Hannah, Liam, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to celebrate our 100th episode with yourselves. We love your support that you show us, and we appreciate that. So thank you so much, and we look forward to a brighter 2023.
The band might have a song for you.
To Mike and the rubbish trip.
It'll be our theme song.
It could be our new intro for the new year. There we go, Liam. There's a challenge for you.
All right, that's a challenge.
Thanks for having us. And it was an honour to be alongside Mike. We were, before we knew Mike as a friend, we were fanboy.
Yep.
Not that he knew that.
Actually, we forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, one of the reasons why we brought you guys together is because to our listeners, there's been a little bit of friendly banter between you guys in terms of the popularity contest.
That's right, this wasn't like the most popular
until
podcast.
you came along and knocked me off.
Oh, I think it was the other way around, actually, or something.
Oh, right.
No, I hate to say it, but it's neither of you. You guys have been...
Who is it now?
It's someone that doesn't even have one bit of social media presence. Can you believe it? And he broke records in terms of the most downloads in 1 week and the overall. And that's Dr. Jack Santa Barbara.
Oh, yeah.
I do believe the mic effect was strong with that one. So, Mike, thank you for sharing that.
No, I'm very happy to be knocked down by Jack. That's for sure.
But with Jack, again, very important conversation to our listeners. It was episode number 9 for this year. And we spoke about all sorts of things around renewable energy and the growth paradigm. And it's all along the same theme. We do push about eat healthy, you got to be physically active, you got to do all these important things. But the reality is there's the big reality check. So, yeah, it's no surprise that these kind of episodes trend are strongest because it does resonate with a lot of people. On that note, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.